Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Cathedral. We hope that you have enjoyed a wonderful holiday season, and as we enter this new year of 2015, we invite you to worship with us at the Sunshine Cathedral on Sundays at 9 and 10:30 a.m. If you're in the Fort Lauderdale area, we're very easy to find. We invite you to worship with us in person, but if you're worshiping with us via the website, we say many blessings to you and hope that you will have an opportunity to visit our campus soon. But now, as we enter this new year of 2015, join us now for the exciting worship here at the Sunshine Cathedral.
Our first reading is a reading from the Teachings of Abraham by Esther and Jerry Hicks. Your habit of resistant thought is the only thing that ever keeps you from allowing the things you desire. And although you certainly did not intentionally develop these resistant patterns of thought, you did pick them up along your physical trail, bit by bit and experience by experience. But one thing is very clear. If you do not do something that causes a different vibrational offering, then nothing in your experience can change. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
Our second reading is a reading from the Torah. From Mount Hor they set out by the way to the Red Sea, to go around the land of Edom. But the people became impatient on the way. The people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food. Then the Infinite sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many of the Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by speaking against the Holy One and against you. Pray to God to take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people. And the divine healer said to Moses, "Make a poisonous serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live." So Moses made a serpent of bronze and put it upon a pole. And whenever a serpent bit someone, that person would look at the serpent of bronze and live. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
Well, how many were at the Leslie Jordan show last night? That was here last night. Did you love it? I can't help but notice that some people were here last night for that amazing show that didn't make it back this morning. And, you know, that's okay. If you wanted to call Leslie Jordan Church, that's fine. But don't get snake bitten and call me for help today, because I'm offering the snake bite cure today in this sermon. No, we're so glad if you were here last night. We're so glad if you're here today. Moses has led his people out of Egyptian slavery. He has taken them under the cover of darkness out of their oppressive condition and into the wilderness, where they will be safe from their former oppressors. But you notice how they get a little whiny along the way? Do you notice how they start to kvetch a little bit, how they start to complain along the way, and even start remembering how good it was back in slavery? I can't, in this crowd, say bondage, because it doesn't always mean the same thing, but but in slavery, they are missing the good old days but they forget that it wasn't good. They wanted out of that. I mean, Moses says, let's go. Don't even let your bread rise. You know, don't even add leaven to your bread. It has to stay flat, so we can just up and go. You may not have time for it to rise. At a moment's notice, we have to be able to get out of here. And they said, yeah, Moses, that's a good plan. And he said, and when you go, grab everything you can that's not nailed down. And they said, yeah, Moses, that's a good plan. And they took everything they could with them except a map or a compass, which is why they were lost for so long. But now that they are out of that enslaved situation and they're in the wilderness, and they're free and responsible for their choices and their freedoms, and they're having to negotiate things all along the way and address situations as they pop up, now they're sort of glorifying those good old days of slavery. The wilderness offers its own set of challenges. Yes, they're out of slavery, but wilderness is, after all, wilderness. Yes, they have a future filled with promise, which they imagine as a promised land. But to get there, they must deal with unknowns and struggles and delays and setbacks. Can they keep the vision of what is possible and let it energize them through the difficult times? Their choice will determine their experience. If they can look more to the vision than to whatever is happening in the moment, if they can see what is possible, if they can see what exists in the realm of infinite possibilities and choose to move toward that, they can move through the temporary difficulties. The difficulties are facts, and facts change. And how you get through the ever-changing facts is to know the unchanging truth. Will they know the truth so that they can navigate the facts? The choice they make will determine their experience. That's the background for our story today from the book of Numbers. In the story, Moses' community has experienced battles and uncertainties and hardships. They are living on manna, which, though edible, does not provide a well-balanced diet. They don't even know what it is. In fact, the word manna means, what is it? Someone just saw some flaky stuff on the ground and said, what the heck is that? And someone else said, I don't know, but I'm hungry enough to try it. And they ate it and they lived, and then suddenly everybody is eating the what is it. Now they called it bread from heaven, but more likely it was an excretion from a plant or an insect. Edible, even sweet and tasty, but not terribly substantial. Added to manna, the occasional quail would fly by, and so they could add some meat to their flaky bug secretion. And every once in a while, they would find water in rocks. But insect secretions, rock water, and the occasional stray quail isn't luxury dining. But still, their needs are being met, and they are continually moving toward a land, a life of promise, of infinite possibilities. But they're tired. They were in slavery, and that was exhausting. They had experienced a famine in their land and moved to Egypt for a better life, and things went well for a while, but then there was a regime change, and they wound up being targeted because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, because of their difference, and so these once welcome immigrants are now targeted and treated badly. I'm so glad that would never happen in our situation, in our world, but in those ancient days, immigrants weren't well treated sometimes. And so they had gone to Egypt for a better life, and then the government turned on them, and they were enslaved. And now they finally escaped slavery, but they're in the wilderness, and they don't know what's next, and they're hunting for quail and hunting for water out of rocks and eating whatever that is that bugs are leaving behind. And they're tired. And in their tiredness, they're also frustrated, and they're also afraid. What if there's not a quail tomorrow? What if the bugs quit dropping whatever that is that we've been eating? And they start to complain bitterly. They've started focusing on the what if it all goes terrible more than on it can get better. They're focusing on what is negative, and they're becoming more negative, and their experience is becoming more negative. Funny how that works. Rather than celebrating what they can do together, rather than remembering what they have done together, rather than remembering what can happen if they just will keep the vision, they spend all their time grumbling about what they don't like and what they don't yet have. They are focusing on what they don't like. They are focusing on lack. But where attention goes, energy flows. Their focus is making their reality. And so the more they grumble, the more they have to grumble about. Funny how that works. And they start to remember those good old days of slavery. Remember when we were slaves and we didn't have any agency? Remember when we didn't have we couldn't even decide how to live our lives? Remember when we only had whatever people would give us, and they would call us whatever they wanted to call us and make us do whatever they wanted us to do? And if we didn't do it the way they wanted, how they'd be mean to us? Remember those days, how we missed those, how great that was? When we were treated like beasts of burden, like property, where our very humanity was denied. They remember the glorious Egyptian empire, forgetting that it was built on their backs. And they remember having plenty of food and shelter, even though even that may not be a terribly accurate memory. They left Egypt behind in search of a life of dignity. They left what was in search of what could be, but they've gotten in the habit of constantly complaining, and they've twisted their memories so that Egypt now represents the good old days, and the journey to a land of promise is what they find onerous. They've got it all ass backwards. Have we ever romanticized the people who weren't terribly good to us? Have we ever missed the politicians, the family members, the lovers, the jobs, the churches that never accepted us totally? Have we ever longed for the good old days of Egypt and let our bitterness delay finding a new promise, a new experience of joy and empowerment? In response to their habitual negative attitudes and constant complaining, fiery serpents appear. Now, I don't believe that a God outside of themselves sent serpents to kill people. I would have no use for such a God. Such a God would be a tyrant, and tyrants must be resisted at all cost. No, of course, God didn't send snakes just because people had bad attitudes. But bad attitudes are poisonous. Bad attitudes are toxic, and we can create our own snake drama. Using the serpents as an allegory for our own poisonous attitudes, that makes sense. When the people repent of their negative attitudes, then the bronze serpent is introduced as a healing modality. It sounds like ancient folk magic, or maybe like the unscientific miracle cures that used to be called snake oil. But this isn't just one more snake oil story. This is an allegory showing us that complaining leads to toxic experiences, and repenting, that is, making a positive change, changing from the habit of complaining to a habit of hope and happiness, leads to healing. Bitter or toxic or poisonous attitudes can make us emotionally and spiritually sick. So when we look boldly at our challenges, the bronze serpent, and dare to face them, we discover we can overcome them. We can face the facts by knowing the truth. When we choose to be grateful for our blessings and hopeful about our challenges, we experience healing. The story may not be so much about what did happen once a long time ago, but about what does happen over and over and over in our lives, what we are experiencing by right of consciousness. Facing the problem and repenting, choosing new, better attitudes, lead the people to healing. The story shows us that negative attitudes lead to suffering, but changing our attitudes in a more optimistic and positive direction brings strength and renewal to us. Now, there are other snake stories in the Bible, also allegorical. There's that terribly chatty snake in one of the creation myths. I love the chatty snake story. There is in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16. Originally, Mark 16 ends with verse 8, but then there was a later addition added. And in the later addition, verse 18, it says that if you drink poison or handle snakes, you won't be hurt. I would not suggest that we test that theory. I would not suggest that we put that to the test, because that too was allegorical. But my favorite snake story comes from the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul is a prisoner on a boat on his way to Rome for trial, a trial that will lead to his execution. A storm pops up, and the ship he's on is forced to shore on the island of Malta. Shipwrecked, Paul starts gathering wood to build a fire. Acts 28 tells us Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer." I'm sure that's the conclusion you would reach if you saw someone with a snake hanging from him. That must be a murderer. Look at that snake. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. Paul has survived a storm. Paul has survived a shipwreck, and now he suffers a snake bite. Have you ever had one of those days? Where one misfortune after another plagues you? Well, the people who lived on the island saw Paul having that day, and they jumped to some conclusions. Have you ever had a hard time and felt like people were judging you instead of offering you compassion for your difficulties? Well, I just don't know what was in your consciousness to make all that happen. Well, you do know why you're getting cursed out now, though, right? You understand that, right? We're clear about that, right? Like, we always want to blame people because we think if we can figure out why things aren't going their way, then we are safe and nothing bad will ever happen to us. How's that working out for anybody? I remember in the early days of the AIDS crisis, some angry, wrist-slapping, finger-pointing, name-calling, pugnacious preachers of doom and gloom declared that AIDS was a divine punishment. I suppose it never occurred to them that a God that would strike entire communities with a deadly disease wouldn't be the sort of God that any sane person would want to worship. I suppose it never occurred to them that the advent of antiretroviral medication would make their false prognostications look ridiculous. I suppose it never occurred to them that it didn't make sense that if this was God striking people down because of God's prejudices, that God had pretty lousy aim because some people in that community survived and people in other communities got infected. I suppose it never occurred to them that if God was so offended by love and attraction that God would try to wipe out entire communities, that would make God look pretty petty and worse, evil. I remember once visiting a couple who were very ill from AIDS complications. They owned a beautiful house and they had lovely gardens, but there were no effective medications yet. And one of the two men were bedridden. It was sad that a young couple was struggling just to survive, and one of them was declining faster than the other. But what was sadder, tragic really, is that the one who was not bedridden agreed to take care of his dying partner, but had otherwise broken up with him. You see, he had found a church that told him that AIDS was God's punishment for homosexuality, and that if he would renounce his homosexuality, God might take away the AIDS that God had given him. That's really bad immunology, by the way. That's really bad science, and it's really bad theology. Well, this young man was so desperately afraid that he abandoned the love of his life in order to secure a miracle from a deity that he believed was punishing him for how and who he loved. Of course, no such miracle ever occurred, and they both died without the comfort that their shared love should have been able to give them. How heartbreaking to look back at that time and those who still hold such unenlightened views and see that religious people chose blame and shame and terror over hope and compassion. People were infected with a deadly virus. They needed care, not condemnation. Paul is storm-tossed, shipwrecked, on his way to ultimate execution, and now he's been attacked by a viper. Paul needs care, not condemnation. Someone might have said, poor thing, he can't catch a break. Let's try to help him. Let's encourage him. Let's hold the truth for him. Let's see that beyond these facts, there is a truth of his infinite goodness and perfection. But instead, the people said, he must be a bad guy. The gods are punishing him. What horrible gods some people worship. That's why it's important that we constantly offer up a bigger experience of religion, a larger view of spirituality, a more inclusive understanding of the divine. We will never be better than the God of our understanding. So if our God is petty and nasty and vile and punishing and intolerant and hateful, there is almost no hope of us being better than our God. But if our God is all love, all beauty, the field of all possibilities, the substance of all life, the power that is everywhere fully present, then our good God is the truth of our lives, and we can hope to live into that divine reality. It may take us a lifetime or more, but we will be moving in the direction of infinite compassion, indomitable hope, and healing love. Emerson said, it behooves us to be careful what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are becoming. Well, look what Paul did. Yes, the storm tossed him about, but he held on. And yes, the ship crashed, but he picked himself up and started building a fire to keep warm. And yes, a viper fastened itself onto his hand, but he shook it off. Things happen, and sometimes they don't seem fair, but we are in charge of how we respond to each and every situation. We can choose to stand tall in spirit if we are unable to stand tall physically. We can choose to go to peace instead of to pieces. We can choose to start over. We can choose to believe in our sacred value, even when others are calling us everything but children of God. Snakes strike, but we can shake them off. The finger pointers, the name callers, the gossips and accusers don't define us. They are simply revealing what is inside of them. We don't have to accept their judgment of us. We don't have to accept that the poison they are projecting has to be our reality. That's for them to work out. We can shake it off. Diagnoses, financial hardships, betrayals, natural disasters, they need not be the end of our story, nor must they determine how we feel about life. When fear, like a viper, strikes, we can shake it off. We can deny fear's power over us and affirm that we are God's miracle and not God's mistake. If anyone has ever said that you are anything other than a beautiful part of God's perfect creation, shake that mess off. They may be selling it, but that doesn't mean that we're buying it. Even when our own thoughts betray and attack us, we can cancel those thoughts and shake them off and embrace a new thought, an affirmation of our goodness and innate perfection. This isn't pie in the sky, rose-colored glasses stuff. We just need to notice when our default position is fear or self-pity or blame. And once we find that our thoughts are habitually negative, then we can start to make corrections so that we can become more optimistic, more serene, more aware that we deserve to be happy. Maybe that's what the whole Lenten journey is meant to be. It has been said that Lent can stand for let's eliminate negative thinking. Habitual negative thinking led the people of our story in Numbers today into a place of suffering, and eliminating negative thinking is what restored them and allowed them to move forward to the blessings that they were always meant to have. Once they were able to change their thinking, they got to be moving forward again, and they were headed in the direction of their promises of the truth once again. If we can eliminate our negative thinking as they did, we can move forward to the life of blessings like they did. We can follow their example, and this is the good news. Amen.
Hello, I want to thank you for joining us for worship today here at the Sunshine Cathedral. Again, if you're ever in the Fort Lauderdale area, please stop by and worship with us on Sundays at 9 and 10:30 a.m. If you'd like to find out more about the Sunshine Cathedral, about our resources, or about our books published by our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Durrell Watkins, or if you'd like to make a donation to the Sunshine Cathedral, please visit us at www.sunshinecathedral.org. Until the next time, may God continue to richly bless you on your journey.